everyone, at least in India. Good morning to two of our panelists in the East Coast of the United States. Welcome to the webinar series, Biodiversity Conversations, India's Opportunities and Challenges. This is a series of about 12 webinars starting today over the next 6 weeks, going through till end of October. My name is Ravi Chellam. I'm the CEO of Metastring Foundation and part of the Biodiversity Collaborative. I'm a wildlife biologist by training. This webinar series is co-organized by the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, the National Biodiversity Authority, and the Biodiversity Collaborative. All webinars starting from this introductory one will focus on various aspects and programs of the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Well-Being. And we are very happy to have a distinguished panel to introduce and talk in some detail about this mission. But before I introduce them and invite them to address us, I have to also explain why this webinar series, how it's been organized, what it aims to do. The purpose of this is to actually, in some sense, go back, open, public, worldwide, to inform, spread the message about what this mission is about, how it's been structured, what are the plans for implementation, what it aims to achieve, who have been involved, and who's likely to be involved as we move forward, both in conceptualization as well as implementation and monitoring of this fairly ambitious program. We are specifically also trying to focus on scientific institutions, both in the government and in civil society, trying to reach out as much as possible to science communicators, to the media, as well as civil society organizations, which we had planned to do in a much more active way, but for obvious reasons since March, our efforts to physically hold consultations have been constrained. We have a few logistical issues related to today's webinar, and I would like to spend a few minutes to address these right now. First of all, we've received a bunch of questions by email, but through this webinar, people can ask questions using the question and answer function that you see at the bottom of your screen. We'll try our very best to answer all questions. In case time becomes a constraint, we will answer all of your questions later by email. And on your chat box, you should begin to see details of how you can reach us. In case this webinar on Zoom platform touches 500 participants, people will have to go to Facebook Live, the Biodiversity Collaborative's page, to participate, because the Zoom platform will only allow a maximum of 500 participants. All webinars are being recorded and will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel, and you will see the link to our YouTube channel also appearing in your chat box as we speak. I earnestly request all of you, including the panelists, to follow the Biodiversity Collaborative on social media so that you get constant updates on what our plans are and what's happening and the future webinar and much more. We are planning to hold on an average 2 webinars every week starting today, this week. There is, I think, 1 week where we will have only 1 webinar. Typically, there will be a webinar early in the week, which is either Monday or Tuesday, and the second webinar will be later in the week, either Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. We have disabled chat so that people don't get distracted, but the Q&A box is open for asking questions. We've also muted microphones and disabled cameras so that bandwidth doesn't become a challenge. All of us know that internet and power can become challenging, and if there are any disruptions, I request you to be patient. We will do our very best to come back live and resume what we are doing. Even after the webinar, I would request our attendees, especially if there are any issues that you want to discuss, any ideas you want to propose to us, please use the email ID that's been shared to get in touch with us. Now to dive into today's webinar, which title is National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Well-Being, Enhancing Biodiversity, Augmenting Human Well-Being. As I said, we are very happy, we're delighted to have a very high quality panel. Dr. V.B. Mathur, Chairman of the National Biodiversity Authority, who's joining us from Chennai. Dr. Kamal Bawa, President of ATRI, joining us from Boston. Ruth DeFrees, Professor at Columbia University, joining us from New York City. To give you a brief introduction of the process that has been followed so far, Dr. Bawa, on behalf of the Biodiversity Collaborative, made a presentation to the inaugural meeting of the Prime Minister's Science, Technology, Innovation Advisory Council in October 2018, nearly 2 years ago. This concept was well received, and in November 2018, we got a go-ahead, a kind of an approval from the PMSTIAC to proceed further in developing the concept into what is called as a detailed project report. This process has been supported by the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor through a grant which the Biodiversity Collaborative has been implementing in partnership with a few other institutions since October last year. The process involved a series of national and thematic consultations, which enabled us to receive feedback from a wide set of stakeholders, scientists, civil society participants, implementers, and that resulted in the detailed project report and the Expenditure Finance Committee memo being prepared and submitted to the government in December last year. I'm very glad to inform all of you that the Honorable Minister of Environment and Forest and Climate Change, Government of India, has approved the detailed project report in mid-March this year. And currently, the interministerial process, the EFC process, is ongoing, and more details will be provided by Dr. Mathur when he addresses us. I just want to kind of give you a brief flavor of some of what I feel are unique about this initiative. It's right from the beginning been a partnership between government, research, academic, civil society, and to a limited extent, community-based organizations. But moving forward, it will also strongly involve media, and it aims to involve as much as possible the citizens of this country, especially the youth and the students. By design, it has a significant grants program. There is a core program, of course, but built around it is a significant grants program, which will ensure that the national mission is truly national in its coverage and is inclusive in its planning as well as implementation. I do want to inform the audience that due to a family emergency, the Principal Scientific Advisor is unable to join us today. This kind of emergency happened last night, so he regrets, and he is very likely to join us in one or more webinars in this series. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Kamal Bawa to address this gathering. Kamal, for very few people who don't know, is a doyen of biodiversity research and studies in India especially. He's of course worked across the tropics. He's a fellow of the Royal Society, fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and fellow of the American Philosophical Society. He was, till recently, the distinguished professor of biology in University of Massachusetts, and he's, amongst many awards, a recipient of the Linnaean Medal. Sorry about that. I have known Kamal for a good 2.5 decades now, and he's been one of the, amongst his great skills that I always admire is his great level of patience and ability for hard work, things that all of us can emulate. Kamal Bawa.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. I'm really delighted to be a part of this enterprise, and really look forward to interactions not only with our panel members, but all of you by email or otherwise. So I'm very glad to be here. India, as we know, has a unique and very rich biodiversity. And this biodiversity has been declining, not only in India, but also in many other parts of the world. I think the importance of the biodiversity really has been highlighted by the pandemic we are going through. And it's very, very obvious that we have to repair our relationship with nature. And I think a reimagined relationship with the natural world really lies at the heart of this mission. And I want to describe very, very briefly the structure of the mission, and then Dr. Mathur will come in and he will provide not only the additional justification for the mission, but also the process, where we are in the process, and how the mission will be implemented. So if I can share the screen. Ravi, you can see my screen? Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So the mission has several elements, and I'm going to present you a very, very complex slide as I explain the mission, and I will come back to that slide again. But basically, the key objectives of the mission is really to transform biodiversity science in India to fulfill several goals. And one of those goals is to meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals related to environment, poverty alleviation, and other related areas. So the mission is quite complex. It has 6 or 7 very distinct interlinked elements dealing with climate change, health, ecosystem services, and green economy. Agriculture is a very, very important element of the mission. And another goal of the mission is to strengthen institutions, both in academic institutions, NGOs, communities, public institutions, for the assessment and sustainable utilization of biodiversity. And of course, in that connection, we want to create a cadre of professionals trained to secure our biodiversity in future. And of course, one of the very important goals, and I know there is a question with respect to that too, is to really create a mass movement to engage thousands, if not millions, of students, citizens in documenting, conserving, and sustainably utilizing our biodiversity, just in a matter of few years. Of course, the mission is a long-term mission, and it will take several years or many years to accomplish the goals I have outlined. I will come back to this slide later, but wanted to mention here that mission is quite complex. It has many elements. And let me explain to you very, very quickly the 7 major components of the mission. The first one is on the assessment of our natural resources, our biodiversity resources, called Nassag Bharath. And this component itself has 3 sub-programs. One is exploration, discovery, and genetic characterization of India's biodiversity, in which Botanical Survey of India, Zoological Survey of India, Wildlife Institute of India, and many other institutions will really play key role. The second is for people's engagement in biodiversity documentation. I think many of you know India's unique concept people's biodiversity registers, which is going to be handled by National Biodiversity Authority. Of course, I should mention National Biodiversity Authority, as Ravi mentioned, is the nodal agency for the mission, and they, of course, will be involved in everything. But for this particular component, they will be playing a key role. And then, of course, cataloging and mapping life of India, as we call it, the CML component. And I'm not going to go into the details, as I mentioned. I think we are going to have webinars for each of these sub-programs, and you will have opportunity to get more details then. The second component is biodiversity and ecosystem services. As many of you know, our ecosystems provide a range of services, and we have a very poor documentation of what these services are, what are the trade-offs involved in these ecosystem services, what are the trends in these ecosystem services. So the idea here is to map ecosystem services and address both ecological and economic consequences of trade-offs in the use of ecosystem services. And let me pause here to emphasize the point. I think you see the word ecological and economic consequences. The mission is very interdisciplinary, and the mission is also very integrative in a wide variety of other ways, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And then, of course, a major goal of this component is going to enhance and restore ecosystem services for improving not only the integrity of ecosystems, but also for the well-being of people. The third component is biodiversity, climate change, and disaster risk management, and I can't really overemphasize the importance of this component. Climate change, as we know, is going to bring another series of public health consequences and many other environmental challenges. So a very significant part of the work will be devoted to climate change and disaster risk management. And I think here the point to emphasize is the emphasis is going to be on the role of biodiversity, in mitigating both climate change and disaster risk management. And again, a very significant part of that will be the restoration of biodiversity, restoration of land, restoration of ecosystem services, and so on and so forth. So the components 2 and 3 are very closely linked together, and the members of the core team are more or less the same for this second and third component. The biodiversity and agriculture component, I think the central goal here is to how to increase biodiversity in our agricultural ecosystems to make them climate resilient, as well as to increase agricultural productivity, agriculture-based enterprises, increase income of the farmers, and of course, the food and nutritional security, as has become very obvious during the current pandemic, the importance of nutrition, and of course, the importance of food security. And here I want to emphasize another point. I think not only the grants program will involve a range of people, but the core programs also will involve a range of institutions. I have a map here, and you can see how the core team of biodiversity and agriculture, consisting at least at this time of representatives from more than 30, 40, even 50 institutions, will be working in many different parts of India. And that is going to be true for almost all the components. Biodiversity and health. Of course, we all now realize the importance of linkage between biodiversity and human health. The concept of One Health that links ecosystem health with animal health and people's health. And this particular component will focus on emerging infectious diseases. Another subcomponent will really emphasize the work on medicinal plants, revival of traditional Indian medical heritage, a citizen portal on medicinal plants, which should be up and running very, very soon. And of course, conservation of medicinal plants. Biodiversity and bioeconomy. And we want to assess the really market, or I would say economic value of biodiversity in selected locations perhaps, and eventually, of course, all over in India. What are the possibilities in terms of enhancing biodiversity-based livelihoods in a reimagined agriculture, in restoration, in nature, scientific and educational tourism, and of course for select industries, the potential demand and substitution of bioresources. So this component, again, I should say, is very much linked to, or in a way synonymous with, circular economy, the concept of green economy, and so on and so forth. Finally, the last component, biodiversity and capacity building, I think it's going to engage, as I mentioned earlier, really thousands of students, citizens in mainstreaming biodiversity, mainstreaming biodiversity in our daily lives, but also strengthening our academic infrastructure from the school level to the higher educational system in terms of the biodiversity science, and of course, communication and outreach. Communication about biodiversity would be a very, very important component of this program. I think we are going to be focusing on many parts of India, of course, needless to say that, but a particular focus will be on aspirational districts, where I think we have really good opportunities to embed sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystem services in development programs. And this is also, I would say, one of the key goals, if not the most important goal of the mission. And of course, in these districts, we have an opportunity for biodiversity assessments, including people's biodiversity registers and provisions for access and benefit sharing of biological resources. How do we co-produce knowledge for enhancing income from biodiversity-based livelihoods, climate change resilience, agroforestry, and so on, so forth. And how do we really build local capacity, and local capacity not only of local institutions, but also at the grassroots level. And I think now I can come back to this very complex figure, and you can see the centerpiece of this, this illustration is Nassag Bharath. It will handle huge amounts of data, but in a very different way. I think we want to incorporate not only modern digital tools, but want to build digital platforms for information sharing, for developing information systems for many of the components. And then of course, the data and information from all the 6 other programs will feed into this Nassag Bharath component. And then I think important point to note is that each of these components is linked with particular aspects of human well-being in these dark green boxes. And the numbers in these boxes indicate the sustainable development goals and targets that we hope to realize once the mission is implemented. And again, I want to emphasize, this is the last slide, that we have great opportunities. We of course have challenges. I think we have to convert these challenges into opportunities for a really, truly integrative and transformative program, which is nurtured through collaboration and partnerships. And I think Biodiversity Collaborative is a very good example of that partnership and collaboration. Already it involves public institutions, government institutions, non-government organizations, and we have barely started. The mission will use digital tools, artificial intelligence, environmental DNA, and so on, so forth, to truly assess the richness of life we have in our country and document it and develop plans for its sustainable use. And the outputs of the mission will be linked with policies for enhancing biodiversity and meeting societal needs. And as I mentioned earlier, communication, citizen science, education are going to be very, very important component of the program. So let me close by saying that we are going to really rely on you, many of you who are attending these webinars, and of course many others with whom we are going to interact, to really implement this mission, to be a part of this enterprise. And so I really greatly appreciate this opportunity to have some interaction with you, although this interaction is virtual. But that's all I wanted to say. And I'll come back if there are any questions and answers. Over to you, Ravi.
Thank you, Kamal. Next on the list to speak to us is Dr. DrVinod Mathur, who has been the chairperson of the National Biodiversity Authority since September last year. And for people like me who've been working with Dr. Bava and others since about July of 2018, with Dr. Mathur joining the National Biodiversity Authority, we got a clear and strong boost to the various processes that we were working with to get this ball rolling on the national mission. Prior to joining as chairperson of the National Biodiversity Authority, Dr. Mathur served as director of the Wildlife Institute of India from 2014 to 19. And I'm very glad to say from about the mid-80s, we were colleagues at the Wildlife Institute of India before I moved out in the early 2000s and headed south to Bangalore. He has been spearheading India's initiatives to mainstream biodiversity in key sectors and policy mechanisms. And he's currently serving as a member of the UN CBD and UN IPBES to promote the research and policy interface. Dr. Mathur.
Thank you, Ravi. Can you see my slide and hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. So, good afternoon, friends. Dr. Kamal Bava, the president of ATRI, has given an excellent update on the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Well-Being. And Dr. Ravi Chellam has explained the rationale behind the initiation of this webinar series, the first of which is on at the moment. I will take a little more time to explain how this mission is a legacy in the making. As you can see the title, Legacy in the Making. See, we all know that 73 years of our independence, the biodiversity community has now got an excellent opportunity to work together and to respond to the ongoing biodiversity crisis, which affects the entire world, and of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is now our turn to turn this crisis into an opportunity and to push the biodiversity science as the science for sustainable development. There are several salient features of this mission, some of which were explained by Dr. Bauer, but I would like to tell the broad aspects of that. So this mission is at the outset innovative in design, and innovation is coming in many ways, through its content, through its coverage. And I want to reach out to my young colleagues in universities, in colleges, in scientific institutions, that one of the key elements of this mission is the grants program, under which scientists and researchers and students will be awarded funding to pursue the activities of the mission. And I'm very pleased to say that as high as 64% of the grant is reserved for the grants program, and I can assure you that this will be administered in an open, transparent, and competitive process. The mission is also inclusive in implementation. The two biggies, the Zoological Survey of India and the Botanical Survey of India, are part of the process in developing that, and a large number of institutions and civil society organizations at the national level, at the regional level, and at the local level are going to be part of this implementation. To my colleagues in Northeastern India who are making a point that how they would be linked, I can assure you that this mission has a mantra: no one is left behind, and we should follow it in true letter and spirit in the implementation phase. As Dr. Baba mentioned, that we also plan to launch a national initiative for sustained assessment of resource governance. And the idea is that this grassroots level program, which starts at the panchayat level, goes right to the top of number crunching of big data, is becoming part of it. Obviously, the whole mission is high in terms of the cost, but what is important is it is higher return on investment. So every single penny that will be spent will lead to larger return, and we would have a good pool of scientists, researchers, and everyone connected to science benefiting from that. And then see policy coherence in our country. We have a plethora of conservation laws which sometimes talk to each other, sometimes they don't talk to each other. So here is that we are trying to set up a mechanism for seamless integration and implementation of conservation and development policies. Mind you the words, we are talking of development as well. So it's not that this mission is only conservation oriented. We feel the challenges of development and the programs and the mission is going to respond. And the modern mantra of the present government, science for people and people for science. This is what this mission is going to promote as we go along. And I must say, I did a lot of homework to find out which country, either in the global south or in the global north, has this kind of a mission and a program. And I can say with confidence that we are among the first ones to launch to this program over there. Now I want to spend a few minutes talking about curves. Now we all know during our childhood what a curve meant to us. But I want to draw your attention to the last 6 months where we have been talking about the COVID-19 curve. And there is a lot of learning that we need to take from that. And then that learning we need to relate that the other big curve of the biodiversity loss, what are the learnings for us? So see, this is the COVID curve. You would recall early January, February this year, the number of cases were coming. And you can see this big graph on your left going up. And we were concerned that how can we deal with these cases unless we have a health policy measures built into it. So the entire effort was, can we flatten this curve? How can public health institutions work with others to deal with this kind of a crisis? I won't get into the details whether we have flattened the curve or not. It depends to whom you're talking. But there is a very important message that this pandemic, which is a part of a zoonotic diseases or a crisis, then expanded to human transmission. And we are now in a situation, comparatively, India has done a lot. And there is a lot of learning to be seen here to see how synergies, how coherence, how complementarities can be built in dealing with this very drastic situation. But this is what I want to explain. Way back in 2009, this graphic was given by Patrick, and he talks about the decline in natural capital. As you can see, the dark green line going southwards from 2009 to 2050, that if there is no policy action, if we talk what is called as a business as usual, then the biodiversity losses are going to occur. But then there is a way to deal with that. And I draw your attention to these arrows on the right. 4 things are required. We need to invest in natural capital. We need to pick up economic signals. We need to improve our governance. And of course, we need to regulate. There can be no management without regulation. So these are the 4 sets of actions which are required. And we know that how our own country, we have set up a network of protected areas. We are now talking of corridors and connectivity. We are now talking of green infrastructure. We are trying to build up natural capital and so on. But far more economic reforms are needed. While agriculture is very important and must be promoted, we need to innovate agriculture too. We need to have a very close look at the subsidy reforms. We need to look at what are the policy and ecosystem services benefits and payments of ecosystem benefits which are there. So these are all the things which are being tried. I am not saying that these are new. Since 2009, these have been tried by different countries in different measures, including India. But still, we cannot meet the challenge of reversing the trend of biodiversity loss. Now, interestingly, while I was preparing for this talk, only last week, this graphic came. This is a graphic which was published last week in Nature. And very interestingly, it talks about 3 different scenarios. And I want to draw your attention to scenario 1, which talks about that, yes, it is in our interest to stop the biodiversity loss. And we need conservation efforts. The conservation efforts are also broadly defined that we need sustainable production, we need sustainable consumption. And as I said, for a developing country like ours, and there are many others too, harmonization of conservation with development will also be required. So these are the steps, if we do and if we continue, can help us in stopping the loss. But that is not our goal. Our goal is to reverse. We are now looking at, I want to draw your attention to scenario 2, where we are talking of reversing the biodiversity loss. And you can see this top line green, and you can see how wonderfully the graphic is depicting how loss of forests, how loss of animals are happening. So we need, of course, sustainable production. We need sustainable consumption. We need harmonization of development. But we also need, as you can see, the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Well-Being. There are 7 elements of it, as Dr. Bhava described, and each element is important. And each element will take us to a higher trajectory. And that is what we are looking at, that in the next 10 years, we should be able to change the trajectory of this curve and start looking at biodiversity losses. There's a huge number of interventions which are required, which will be done. And at the same time, let's not forget scenario 3. In black, you can see how degraded the line is, where the animals have disappeared. If we continue with business as usual scenario, then of course the biodiversity loss is imminent, and no matter what you and I can do, we will be in a very, very different and difficult situation. So this graphic is what forms a goal for us, and we are confident that this national mission, which we are painfully and pleasure and with effort trying to plan and implement, will help us in moving towards scenario 1. And lastly, I want to talk about the way ahead. Everybody knows that there is a delay because of COVID-19 pandemic. We were supposed to launch this project, this mission, along with the other 9 missions of the Government of India, from quantum physics to many other things, but there is a delay. And what we are now planning to do is to plan pilot demonstration projects. All those 7 elements that we talked of can be converted into small projects which have low cost, which have low manpower needs, but they will help to demonstrate what our bigger NBM is likely to do. And then I'm sure you are aware that Government of India, the NITI Aayog, has selected 17 aspirational districts. You recall the earlier terminology, we were calling them as backward district, which was not a very good term to use. Now Government of India has defined 117 aspirational districts. So what we are saying, that while this mission is pan-India, we will pick up aspirational districts, 117 in all, but for the time being, till we are able to deal with COVID, we will expand our presence over there. And definitely, this virtual reality is becoming a real reality, I would say. That through these webinar series, through many other means which can be done virtually, we are going to reach out to everybody to see that everybody understands what the programs are, what these activities are, and how they are to be done. So in the next 3 to 6 months, our job is cut out. Although we do have, as I said, a roadmap, but we need to redefine it. We need to refine this roadmap. In the context of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which means no travel. Last 6 months, I'm sure everybody, including me, has not moved out of any place. So we need to do what we can do in this situation. And then as things improve, as our lockdowns get released, we can have a phase where we can do something in the immediate post-19 pandemic. But then there will be a recovery phase and there will be a full recovery phase. And we are now realigning our programs, our work programs, our roadmaps to see how we respond to all these things. And finally, I would say that we need to join forces in whatever capacity you are, a researcher, a farmer, a student, or an academic. We need to bring in a new deal for nature and for people. And at the same time, as our government, as our Prime Minister has said, that our core philosophy is that of Atmanirbhar Bharat, or the self-reliant India. So that is where we are pitching in, that with your support, with your effort, you should be able to move to this higher trajectory and be able to stop the trend of loss and reverse the trend towards a recovery. So these were the few things which I wanted to share with you. I will stop here and we'll wait for any Q&A and any other observations that you might have. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ravi.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. Now, the last speaker for the day, Dr. Ruth DeFrees, is going to give us an international perspective, but she is an old India hand. We were just chatting before we started, and she says it goes back, what, 40 years or something like that. So it's not so much of an outsider's perspective, but it's an international perspective that she's going to give us. She's a fellow of the National Academy of Sciences, USA, and currently the professor of ecology and sustainable development at Columbia University, New York City. She's also chair of the Earth Institute. She's deeply engaged in research in the nexus between conservation, forests, agriculture, and livelihoods in central India. She's a recipient of the MacArthur Fellowship, and she tries to spend as much time as possible at her home near Kanha Tiger Reserve. But today, she's going to speak to us from New York City. Ruth.
Thank you, Ravi. It's such an honor to be part of this important event. My role is to applaud you, congratulate you, and reiterate how important this mission is to India and to the world. So I offer my enormous congratulations on making this vision for a national mission on biodiversity and human well-being into a reality. The mission is bold, it's courageous, it's essential for the moment and for the future, and it is world-changing. We all know that the prevailing paradigm of development is showing its cracks. That paradigm ignores a simple fact that we all, everyone on this planet, everyone depends on biodiversity for food, water, health, spiritual renewal, and so much more. And we're seeing those cracks in the pandemic, in the unprecedented swings in climate, the devastation that causes for livelihoods, and how the wealth is concentrating into the hands of the few. The major flaw in that paradigm is that it ignores the largest asset any country can have, and that is its biodiversity. And we know that India's biological heritage runs deep, it runs strong, and this mission forges a new development path and celebrates and builds on that diversity. This path leads to healthy, safe, and abundant food, clean air, water, fewer infectious diseases and pandemics. And these are ultimately the foundation for prosperity and livelihoods, no matter where you are in the world. There are reams of reports, there are so many studies, there are international conferences that highlight how critical biodiversity is for people's well-being. But there's not a country in the world, as Dr. Mathur said, that has found the recipe to put those ideas into practice. So the question is not only to protect biodiversity, but to use it to advance the well-being of people. This is the special ingredient of this mission. It not only values biodiversity for its own sake, but for the assets it brings for agriculture, climate, water, health, and the deep connections that tie us, all of us, with nature. So this mission will put those, or forms the foundation to put those assets into practice, building on India's rich diversity of plants used as crops, such a wealth and depth of knowledge that lies in the mosaic of cultures and from the iconic wildlife. This mission is a model for the world, and particularly for other megadiversity countries. It moves from what scientists have been saying for decades to real implementation and real action. This mission shows that there is a development path that does not need to be in opposition to biodiversity, rather the converse, that everyone from farmers to city dwellers and everyone in between has a more prosperous and healthier future when biodiversity is valued. So my journey of more than 4 decades to learn about India has been the greatest gift I can imagine. The more I learn that there is so much more to learn. I've learned that India's richness lies in its mix of cultures, languages, and the astounding, beautiful diversity of life, and the deep-seated value that people hold for their biological heritage brings a unique opportunity to deviate from the prevailing path of development. I've learned that it is possible for megadiversity to exist side by side with people. And with this mission, India can turn into reality what we all know to be true, that ultimately health and well-being of a country depends on the health and well-being of the life that it harbors, and all life. So enormous congratulations to Professor Bharath, to Dr. Mathur, to Ravi, to all of you who are out there listening and engaging in this mission. I've known how hard you've worked to get to this launch. Your vision, your passion does reverberate throughout the world and shows a new pathway for a healthy future. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this and look forward to working with you in the future on this mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. We've been getting questions. Said a bunch of questions came by email. We will answer those first. I've also been live answering by text many of the other questions so that we can manage time. So I would like to first call upon Dr. Mathur, Marcela D'Souza, and related questions from Anzar Kuru. and Dr. Paranjit Singh, how can other institutions get involved, number one, and would central universities have any specific role? There is some doubt whether it is in some way restricted to Bangalore-based institutions. Dr. Mathur.
Well, thank you, Ravi. I think I did answer these questions in my presentation, but nevertheless, I would reiterate that there are two elements of this mission. A is comprehensiveness. That means that biodiversity in its largest sense has been defined. No part of it is restricted, including XC2. Some people have asked this question that how do XC2 conservation helps that? So I want to assure you that. And definitely it has a very strong element of inclusiveness. And when I say inclusiveness, we are all aware of the scientific institutions in the country, the ZSI, the BSI, the WI, the FRI, and ICFRE. And we know the tremendous strength of our agriculture and veterinary universities. So we are very specifically targeting to them. We need their expertise. They are pan-India in their character. And therefore, we will have, as we go along, we would be refining our roadmap and seeing to it that they become partners. And the biggest opportunity will come through the grants program that I mentioned. This grants program, which is 64% of the mission, will help in meeting the needs of our young researcher or of a young student or of a young faculty. So definitely, I repeat, inclusiveness and comprehensiveness will ensure that we reach out to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Kamal, from Saurya Das, how can biodiversity be mainstreamed as a part of human life?
It's a big challenge. And I think that, again, I come back to some of the goals of the mission in terms of having very, very extensive program to involve a range of students, right from a very young age, and strengthening institutions. And the second point is about the citizen program. I think it's going to take all of us who are interested in biodiversity to achieve that goal, to make biodiversity relevant to people's lives. So I just want to emphasize that we have opportunities. Biodiversity is everywhere. Look around you. Biodiversity is inside our body. We are walking ecosystems. And so I think it's through educational programs and through citizen science programs, we can reach a very, very large number of people. And we don't have to wait for the mission for that. I think all of us who are in this area have the responsibility and the obligation to spread that message.
Thanks, Kamal. Ruth, this is from Arun Dayanandan. What is the scope for science communicators in bridging the gap between stakeholders?
Thank you very much for that question. I think one of the big learnings in science about communication has been that the communication itself is such an important element that scientists who are focusing on the research are not necessarily very well equipped. It's not their expertise. So that role for the communicator, who is the bridge between the science and the public and the policy, is just so critical and so important to be able to get the message out in a way that scientists would not be able to do on their own. So and I was so happy to see that in Dr. Bawa's presentation, that the communication role is and because it has to be, it cannot be an add-on, it has to be a critical piece and an intentional piece about how to make that communication happen. So I would imagine that there's a very large role, whether you're a writer or a blogger or a journalist, in filling that part of the whole ecosystem in doing the communication. And a very important aspect of communication that has become quite apparent is that who is doing the communication is as important as what the communication is, to be able to connect with the audience. And that the communication works best when the people who are doing the communication are people that the audience can find themselves in and relate to most readily. So I would imagine, and maybe somebody else wants to comment, how important that deliberate attention on communication will be in the mission.
Thanks, Ruth. This is an open question from an anonymous attendee. Any one of you can take it. What is the future plan for in situ conservation of biodiversity with respect to development side by side in the near future? The conservation criteria and threshold have been compromised by various amendments and resolutions. It's probably best, Dr. Mathur.
Thank you, Ravi. I will step 1 minute backward. See, when I joined the Wildlife Institute of India, I'm talking of 30 years ago, we were very distinctly told the difference between in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. And I don't want to explain that, but yes, there was a difference. But now come 2015, 2019, 2020, and now I want to take you back to the conservation of the great Indian bustard in the state of Rajasthan, where in situ conservation areas, ex situ conservation techniques are being tried. The point I'm making is that this day, for certain species in certain situations, the in situ and ex situ difference is largely being obliterated, and we need both. And that is what today, if the great Indian bustard population is going to survive in India, it is because the Wildlife Institute of India, the Ministry of Environment have brought in the principles and practices of in situ and ex situ both. And that is what I'm saying, that wherever and when we talk of restoration, this mission of ours has a huge component of restoration. So restoration will require in situ conservation skills, it will require ex situ conservation skills, and I'm very sure that the colleague who has raised this question, his expertise would be available to see how we can combine them both. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. Kamal, this is to you from Dr. Rajeshwari Raina. Thank you, Professor Bava. This is about creating mass movements for biodiversity conservation. Is there scope to document and analyze how the state, within parentheses, in the past and currently, engages with the few mass movements that exist for biodiversity conservation?
So the question is, tell me again, one is about creating the mass movement in terms of the mission.
Yes.
And
then scope to document, analyze, and engage with the few mass movements.
A few mass movements. I don't know. I very much appreciate the question, first of all. It's a very important question. I'm not that much aware of the current mass movements. There have been several. But I do want to say that one of our limitations has been that the data that is really very data and information that is really a prerequisite for mass movements is very fragmentary. It's not very easily available. And I think what this mission tries to do is going to do is really democratize information, democratize data availability. And that we hope will allow us to have some success in an area where we, despite what we might call this is a mass movement as slogan and all that, we have not been able to achieve our goals. It's going to be a challenge. Yeah.
Again, Dr. Mathur, this is from Chandru Chawla. How do youngsters find career opportunities in biodiversity and conservation fields? There are such few institutions.
Point very well taken. And I can also, to a little disappointment, would say that we don't have any mandate to set up new institutions, but we are definitely working. But there is an alternate. And in this mission of ours, there is a very strong outreach component, and there is a very strong citizen science complement. And when these webinars will take place, I would request you to attend them, because in the citizen science, we are now trying to engage everyone. Whether you live in an urban area, whether you live in a rural area, whether you are formally educated or you are not formally educated. So that perhaps will be the only way in which, in the absence of formal institutions, we can cater to the needs of people who want to move ahead and be part of this big brigade. And we want more people, definitely, from our side, from a humble data collector to a top-notch number cruncher. Everybody is welcome.
Well, there are at least two questions related to pilot projects. One from Dr. Balaji Srinivasa Gopalan, who used to be with senior officer at the Tamil Nadu Forest Department. What is the status of pilot projects? So that's quite simple and easy. The other one is from Karachi Pon Nainen. Could you give more details about the pilot demonstration projects?
So Ravi, both these questions are very valid. And you recall when I said that this mission is going to be innovative. And what is our first step in innovation? That we can't run the project or the mission as we have planned because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So what we are doing, taking the big picture, the big project, the big activities that we are doing, we are carving out activities, areas, and focal areas that where we can work given the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath. And I know both of these colleagues very well. Dr. Nenan has been with me in the IBES, and I know very well. I will come back to them on seeing that what could be the contour of a demonstration project. But basically, these are small time projects in 1 or 2 aspirational districts out of the 116 that we have. And we will need some more ideas and some local support, if possible, to see how we can run in this demonstration effect, the project where the big time movement of researchers cannot take.
Kamal?
Yeah, I just want to fully endorse what Dr. Mathur said. We have the frameworks. Of course, those frameworks need to be further developed with experiences from the field, but we'll be very happy to share that framework and really get additional inputs. So this is most welcome, and we will be in touch.
Thank you both. One time check, we're already 2 minutes over, but the number of questions as we answer is exponentially gone up. There are 55 more questions to be answered. So there's no way we're going to be able to answer all. With your indulgence, I request that we extend it by 10 minutes and try and answer some more of these. The rest is my responsibility to make sure everybody gets answered on email. Is that fine with all three of you? Okay, thanks.
Yes, Ravi. Yeah.
Thanks. Kamal, this is, I think, is to you from Mr. Venkateshan Thiruvengadam. What kind of role and support could be expected from the agriculture universities as a part of this mission?
I think we are going to have a webinar on biodiversity and agriculture. So already, I think the team leaders of those program, they have been working with a range of agricultural institutions, because many of the agricultural institutions are also a part of our National Centers for Agriculture Research. You know, they are part of the National Agriculture Research System. So there are definite plans. I think many of those plans have been implemented in terms of engagement of people. And I can't answer that question. Maybe, Ravi, you might know the number of people that have been involved in the planning, the program, and that component. Right?
Roughly in the region of 50 to 60, right across the ICAR system.
Right across the system. And also, of course, the program is headed by Dr. Uma Shankar, who is a professor at the University of Agricultural Sciences. And I think we can perhaps take up this question in the forthcoming webinar too. They will explain more fully.
This, I think, Ruth, you can give a first go at it, and then I would request Dr. Mathur to chip in. It's from Shivans Goswami. Sir, if you were to rate conservation status of India, what would you say?
Yes. Well, I would say that it is considering that there's 1.3 billion plus people on a land area 1/3 the size of the US, and there is so much wildlife and diversity. It is an incredible, incredible achievement that I know goes long back to the Wildlife Protection Acts and the attention that the government has put into protected areas. And although there's so much more to do, if you look at India compared with other countries in Asia, the degree that wildlife has been protected and gets resources and attention is just incomparable. And that is the wildlife that there is really something to celebrate and build on.
Thanks. Dr. Mathur?
Well, I'll be very candid. On a 10-point scale, I would say that it is little higher than 6, definitely lower than 7, but has the potential to reach 8. So I am very optimistic. Many things which were not happening earlier are happening now. The attention of the ministry, of the government, and none other than Prime Minister. Everybody who heard the 15th August independence speech knows that how the Prime Minister of the country committed from the ramparts of Red Fort that this country will have projects which will have very important conservation projects. So yes, we do have our own share of problems, but at least we are alive to them. And India internationally and nationally is contributing to this post-2020 global biodiversity framework, where we are seeing to it that our viewpoints, our considerations, and most important, the resource mobilization takes place if conservation has to move ahead.
Thank you. This, I think, Kamal and then maybe Ruth. There are two related questions. One from Monica Srivastava. How corporates can contribute towards this mission? And the other one is, where was it? Okay, maybe you can take a stab at that first, Kamal.
Can you repeat it, please? Sorry. What can contribute?
Corporates, companies.
Oh, corporates. I think they have a very, very important role to play. And of course, in sustainable use of biodiversity, in terms of support, in terms of, I would say, in almost every aspect of what we are doing. And I think the point that is probably being made by the question is that the corporates currently are playing a very, very limited role. And very often that's not a very constructive role either. And they have to be more responsible and they have to play a larger role. I would just agree with the sentiment, that that's a huge, huge gap. And we need to address that gap. And I think we will be addressing that gap.
Ruth?
Well, I'll just add that that the private sector, industries, depend on natural resources, depend on water, and depend on being safe from extreme climate events, and they're at risk from an unhealthy environment than anybody else. So the more that these problems come to the fore, the more the private sector, I think, cannot be immune to them, and we'll see it in their interest to engage in protecting natural resources on which they depend.
Kamal, this is from Dr. S.L. Khoti. Thanks, Ruth. How does the mission propose to deal with re-emerging zoonotic diseases?
Again, this will be discussed in, I think, some detail when we have the webinar on the zoonotic diseases. But let me just mention one particular element of that program, and that is to set up surveillance sites, for identify hotspots for the emergence of infectious diseases. I think we have to realize that in many, many cases, in many areas, we are really lacking basic infrastructure in terms of our monitoring programs, not only monitoring biodiversity, but I think monitoring, for example, the origin and spread of infectious diseases. And so that is going to be a very important component of the program.
I request all attendees to keep monitoring the chat because we are posting details related to some of the questions that you're asking. Okay. This is Bibhu Prasad Nayak. I think both Ruth and Kamal can answer this. Though there has been efforts to make conservation research interdisciplinary, we see limited involvement of social science institutions and universities in this effort. Is there any specific effort to bring them on board? Ruth, can you take it first, please?
Well, thanks for the question. This has been an issue in the scientific community for a very long time. And there has been recognition that social science is such a critical piece to bring this interdisciplinary complex together. But it has been, honestly, it's been difficult. And this is not just in India, this is worldwide, everywhere. So I think that, that there's progress, but it honestly has been slow. And I think the way to move forward and get progress is to focus on these specific issues, these topics that the mission is focusing on, and bring in the expertise that is needed around those topics and be very cognizant how important and central the social science is. So I think as you go forward with projects and different topics and different efforts within the mission, if it's thought about in terms of what disciplines do we need to address that problem, rather than how do we bring social science in, then I think we will make more progress in integrating the social sciences.
Thanks. Kamal?
Yeah, I will say my short answer is follow the example of ATRI, where we have tried to foster interdisciplinarity for the last 2 decades. And I think we have been partly successful. It remains a challenge. We are very aware of that challenge. We are very, very aware of that challenge. And it's a key priority for the mission.
Thank you. Final question. We're really out of time, but the number of questions have gone up to 66. So there is clearly a lot of interest in what we're trying to do here. Dr. Mathur, this comes to you from Ravindra Singh. How would the mission design how would the mission design reflect or capture the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, the CBD strategic plan 2021 to 2030, and India's NBSAP that will be prepared in response to the post-2020 framework? If considered in this context, the mission would be instrumental towards implementing post-2020 framework.
Well, very nice question, Ravindra. But I must share with you some insider knowledge that I am very much part of the post-2020 framework, which as I speak and as you know is still evolving. So there is nothing very concrete over there, but we know what kind of global negotiations are taking place. And those negotiations are countries which are part of the global south are now talking of resource mobilization for meeting their requirements. And that is the point which we are arguing at the international fora. And our NBSAPs, and I'm going one step further, that for a country like ours, while the national strategy plan is important, but you know how important are the state strategic plans. So we need to first align the state strategic action plans with the post-2020 framework, and then see that how our mission activities can also get aligned. So the short answer is that everything is up for alignment and realignment. We need to go with a positive mind that yes, we need to swim together, and wherever our interests are well served, we need to work with other countries, with development cooperation, with UN agencies, see that India emerges out as a key player in this post-2020 negotiations.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. I'm going to take my privilege as moderator to answer one last question because I just find it compelling. This is from Ved. Will youngsters help more in this and why? The obvious answer, Ved, is yes. Simply because you have longer to live. You're not set in your ways. You probably will do a much better job on engaging with issues related to the environment and consumption than our generation and immediately previous and past next generation has done. And if you start early and if you're on the right track, we can only hope for much more positive impacts, and the level of energy and optimism the younger generation can bring to the table will always be an energizing influence on whatever we are planning. So on that note, I would like to thank Dr. Mathur, Dr. Bhava, and Dr. DeFrees for being part of this panel, not only talking and giving presentations, but also very patiently giving detailed answers to all the questions. But it's my regret that despite a bunch of answers I gave by text and all the answers we've given live, we still have 70 questions to answer. So I have my homework all set. I might send some by you to get your expert inputs before we send them out. Okay, so in terms, and I also want to thank the entire audience, one for the very, very active participation, and in terms of numbers, we probably had close to 500 people attend this webinar, both on Zoom and on Facebook Live. I would earnestly request all of you to continue to engage with us. An email ID has been given to reach out to us, and we will make sure that timely responses come to you. And as Dr. Bhava, Dr. Mathur have reiterated multiple times, this is by collaboration, this is by inclusiveness that we want to move forward. We don't have answers to all questions, and I think it will be a collective endeavor with all of you to find those answers. Before I close, I also want to thank the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India for supporting this work at this stage and enabling all of us to move the agenda forward as far as biodiversity conservation and human well-being in India is concerned. I request all of you to attend the next webinar scheduled for coming Friday, same time, 1600 hours IST, the announcement of which will come out either tomorrow or latest day after. And I, as already stated, request all of you to also follow the Biodiversity Collaborative on social media so that you get in the loop and updated in a real time. Thank you, and have a safe evening. Bye.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, everyone. Please reassure that we will answer those questions.
Absolutely, absolutely. I will work with Dhruv to make sure we download these questions and find a way to deal with it.
Because I got a call from Dr. Nilima Jairat from Punjab saying, where is my answer? So yes, we will answer her as well. Okay.
Well, we tried our best, Dr. Mathur. I mean, there's still 72 questions. I mean, there's just no way. We need a couple of hours at least. And it keeps coming as we answer more questions.
It's okay.
It just keeps coming.
Okay. Okay. Bye-bye. Okay. Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Bhava. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.
Thank you.